Hi, this is Corey Yarborough, Executive Director of the Hispanic Black Gay Coalition, here for another installment of our mayoral video series. Today, we're here to talk to Councillor Charles Yancey. Charles Yancey is City Councilor of Boston, representing District 4. He is also a former president of the Boston City Council. Today, I'm here to talk about HIV infection, education, and the criminal justice system as it relates to Black and Latino LGBT people in Boston. Thank you, Councillor Yancey, for joining us today at our office for a conversation.
Well, thank you for the invitation.
Cool, great. So I just want to go ahead and hop into it so we can talk about as much as we can today. And I want to start with a question that has been surrounding your campaign, and I think preventing you a little bit from getting to the issue. So I'm just going to ask it first so we get it out the way. And that's the fact that you are running for mayor and re-election as city councilor.
Yes.
And you will be on the ballot for both.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about your decision in doing that, and if you think that decision has impacted your race for mayor.
Well, first of all, I'm responding to requests by numerous members of my constituency who was concerned that my race for mayor may result in my losing a voice in city government, which I've had for 30 years now. So reluctantly, I listened to my constituents and did some homework and learned that it's legally possible to run for both city council and mayor at the same time. It's a unique approach. Certainly, I can't recall any precedent in the city of Boston. But on a national level, it's done routinely.
Okay.
Candidates who run for either president or vice president, if they're members of the United States Congress, in most instances, they keep the name on the ballot in their district while they run for national office. So what I'm doing is more akin to that, and it's not controversial at all. In fact, the most recent presidential election, Mr. Ryan, who is a member of the House of Representatives, ran for vice president, and also for the House of Representatives.
That's right, yeah.
Back in the year 2000, Lieberman, who was a vice presidential candidate running with Al Gore, also had his name on the ballot for United States Senator from the state of Connecticut. So, and I could cite many other examples, but on a local level, I can't recall anyone else trying this.
Okay.
Let me just finish by saying that I am running for mayor of Boston. And if the people decide that they appreciate my experience and my vision for the city of Boston, and they decide they will elect me as mayor of Boston, and if the people in District 4 re-elect me for a 16th term.
16, wow.
15 is already unprecedented.
Yeah.
Then, of course, in November, if I'm successful for both, I'll have to decide at that point whether I will continue on the Boston City Council or move a few feet down the hall on the 5th floor and become the next mayor of Boston.
Great, thank you. I want to talk specifically about the transgender community.
Yes.
Because a lot of times when we say LGBT or gay and lesbian, we're not explicitly talking about their needs. And in some ways you have helped lead the trail for transgender rights and equality in Boston. Back in 2002, October 2002, the Boston City Council approved an ordinance to include the transgender community into anti-discrimination practices, policies. And since then, I would be curious to hear, what do you feel are continuing needs for the transgender community in Boston, and what can be your role in helping us get there?
Well, first of all, I think it's important for us to maintain open lines of communications. I'm not an expert on many subjects, but I understand that we have to respect all human beings. So you may be more sensitive to some issues than I am. So I will rely on you and other leaders in the community to be able to pick up the phone, say, Mayor Yancey, we have to sit down and talk. life is not that pleasant for some of my constituents, and
Yeah.
we just want to have some dialogue. And I fully will expect recommendations to come out of that type of discussion.
Mhm.
Because again, I come from a very traditional family. I come from a family of 9. My folks were married for 50 years. And my dad's family was married for 50 years. And so, in a very real sense, this whole issue is relatively new in terms of the open discussion of the transgender community specifically is fairly recent in the last decade or so. So I will certainly not assume that I have all the answers, but I am certainly willing to listen and to implement policies to send a very clear message that everyone has a right to their city government.
Okay.
We ask you to pay taxes. We also expect you to get the benefits of city governments as well.
Great. So let's shift gears a bit and talk about health disparities,
Yes.
particularly around HIV/AIDS.
Yes.
So overall in Massachusetts, compared to other states, we've done a really, really good job at reducing the number of new infections for HIV. The unfortunate part of that is
We haven't done so in communities of color. And in particular, in your district of Dorchester, HIV infections, new HIV infections are significantly high, one of the highest in the city.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit more about what you think we need to do specifically in Black and Latino communities to beat the HIV epidemic.
Well, first of all, you probably know, you did a little bit of homework, I can tell. You know, I sponsored the legislation that created a line item in the Public Health Commission. It's called the State of Emergency. It was an effort to raise the level of awareness and to increase the level of resources going specifically to the communities of color. Because far too many people in our communities of color, as well as in the rest of the city, are in a state of denial. Some people think that we no longer have a problem, that we no longer have a crisis. And I maintain that today, in 2013, is still at crisis levels.
Absolutely.
And that we have to have a greater sense of urgency within the entire city, but specifically within the communities of color, so they can raise the level of awareness and education, so that we'll be in a stronger position to avoid additional cases and provide more support in nurturing of community members who may unfortunately be afflicted with the HIV or AIDS.
But even with state of the emergency funding, which we're very appreciative for because we get some of that sometimes, the infections are still going up,
Yes.
in particularly in communities of color.
Yes.
So is this something we're missing? Is there something we need in addition to that, or is the funding not going to the right places? What's your thoughts?
Those are all very good questions, and I think they should be totally explored in public hearing, where we can invite some ideas. And let me just tell you, I give tremendous credit to Reverend Franklin Hobbs. He actually brought the issue to my attention, and working together, we got the legislation passed in the city council, and got a great deal of cooperation from John Auerbach when we actually sat down at the negotiating table to figure out what to call it and how to fund it. And I tell people all the time that I made a grievous error because I only asked for $100,000.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And he said yes. So I wonder if I would have asked for $1 million, whether he would have said yes to that, and we would have had far more resources, many more resources to deal with this issue. But the point was really not so much the money, but the fact that we were very explicit in terms of focusing attention on this area. To answer your earlier questions, I happen to agree with you. Enough is not being done. And it may not be simply the amount of money, but it could be leadership, could be some other issues involved. But we definitely have to investigate it and get everyone involved in this effort. That $100,000 was never meant to be a cure-all, but to provide a mechanism where we can engage the entire city in a much more focused way to address this issue. Because if you're going to get sick, Boston's the best place in the world to get sick, right? Because we have all these medical institutions and academic institutions of world renown right here in the city of Boston. So how absurd and obscene it is that in the shadows of these major medical institutions, in the shadows of these academic institutions, in the shadows of some of the wealthiest communities and neighborhoods in the world, that we have so much suffering from HIV and AIDS, and from poverty as well, and racism and homophobia.
Okay. Thank you. So I want to shift gears and talk about crime, which is also something that is mentioned a lot on your campaign website. And with the Boston Marathon, Boston received a lot of attention, a lot of outcry in response to the violence, senseless acts of violence and crime that happened in our own city. But since the Boston Marathon, there have been 85 shootings to date in the city that don't always get reported or the same amount of attention. And a majority of those, I shouldn't say a majority, but a good deal of those are in communities of color, including your district. So tell me a little bit about your solution for crime in our city.
Well, it has to be a multifaceted approach, Courtney, because the sources of violence in our society are almost everywhere. In the media, maybe at home, the fact that we're engaged in warfare, and so there's a lot of violence in our society, and that has to be dealt with. But I also think there's a quiet violence of poverty that has to be addressed.
Absolutely.
The suffering, sometimes quiet suffering, of people who don't have enough food to eat, don't know where the next paycheck is going to come from. Many don't have a roof over their heads. I think that's violence as well. But the overt violence that you're talking about is the shootings that take place. And there are a lot of good people in the city of Boston who've been fighting against gun violence specifically. In fact, I was co-sponsor of Boston's assault weapons ban. It was a novel concept in the 80s, but we did get it passed, and I think it had an impact on reducing violence. And it's been adopted statewide and even nationally up until it expired a few years ago. So those are good solutions. We want to remove the guns from the hands of irresponsible people. I would like to remove them even from some responsible people, but I know
So tell me,
that issue.
So tell me a little bit more about that, as in, like, who are you defining as irresponsible, and through what means would you be, restricting their use?
Well, certainly individuals who would commit violence against others, I consider them to be irresponsible. Okay. I consider those who would utilize a gun, acquire a gun through illegal means, I think they are irresponsible. I think that people who distribute guns as a part of some drug trade, I think those folks are irresponsible. And I would certainly utilize the laws that are already on the books and enforce them more aggressively. And it has to be a national effort, however, because we have, like I said, a lot of good people in the greater Boston area who've done a great job of raising the level of consciousness and asking the question, where did the guns come from? And pointing out how many people are killed in this nation on an hourly basis. But we also need to take a look at maybe some of the sources of the violence itself, as I mentioned a little while ago. And I believe that far too many of our young people of all races in jeopardy because of the rampant violence that takes place in our society. And I believe that if we're able to provide some guidance and mentorship to these young people at the earliest possible age, if we can work with them and their families to let them know what services are available for young people, to actually find jobs for our teenagers so that they're not tempted by the presumed lucrative lifestyle that goes along with the drug trade and other illicit activity. Let them know that there's no reason for them to risk their lives because of that, those negative activities, and let them know that yes, they could go to college, yes, they can become an entrepreneur, yes, they can find a trade if they decide not to go to college, and lead very successful lives. But if they don't have the information, it's much like the issue we started talking about, to the fact the high rate of HIV and AIDS infection is due largely to ignorance. So if we can help educate the people, perhaps they can take the steps necessary to protect themselves.
I think this is a good segue as well, as we talk about crime and who's irresponsible, who's not, to talk about formerly incarcerated people.
Yes.
And it's an issue that HBGC has done a lot around this year.
Very good.
2 months ago, we actually held a summit of formerly incarcerated LGBT people.
Yes.
To provide legal, social resources, but also to give them a space to talk about what's on their mind and talk about what they need from their government. And I want to just read off really quickly some demands to policymakers that came from this summit. And I'm curious to get your just gut reaction to their demands, if you agree with them, disagree with them, but also as mayor, how you could work to meet some of these demands. So I'll read off maybe about 8 or 9 of them. So respect for gender identity and expression of prisoners, LGBT inclusive healthcare in jails and prisons, decriminalization of sex work, elimination of CORI, criminal background checks, hold judges accountable for the treatment of defendants, smaller caseload for public defenders, ending secure communities, ESCOM, eliminate zero tolerance policies in school that lead to imprisonment, and more funding for HIV programs in prison.
Well, I can say that you almost had me at hello for most of those.
Okay.
Not all.
But I certainly agree with maybe 90% of this list. We have to demand that everyone's treated with dignity and respect. Certainly agree with the requirement that we provide adequate and appropriate health care for everyone within the criminal justice system. To fail to do that is really inhumane. So that's a requirement that we have and a responsibility that government has with regards to anyone we incarcerate.
How, as mayor, do you see yourself able to work on some of these issues?
Well, certainly with regards to the issue of CORI, we can make a lot of progress in implementing some legislation that already has been passed in terms of not requiring a box on your application with regards to the criminal record. Once you're the finalist and there's some issues around dealing with youth and others, I think it may be appropriate at least to ask what the history is and get some explanation. I certainly agree with you with regards to the suggestions that we hold our judges accountable. Smaller caseload, I support.
What don't you support? I think that's a little bit more interesting, I guess.
I know. There was one issue that I had some questions with. Certainly I support more funding.
Decriminalization of sex work.
That was it.
Okay.
That
was my gut.
Human exploitation is human exploitation. And that's how I see sex work, at least some of it. So, like I said, you have me on the other issues, but this one, required a lot of thought, because I do think that when a person exploits another human being for whatever reasons, that person should be treated as a criminal.
So when I think of sex work in regards to the work that I do in this community, I'm often dealing with people who, LGBT people,
Yes.
a lot of times gay men in the transgender population who are basically because of the discrimination or lack of education that is tied back to discrimination, can't make a living, can't get a job, can't keep a job because of their gender expression or because of things related to either their race, sexuality, or both. So resorting to sex work is a means of survival in the short term, if not in the long term as well. So in light of that, how can we, if we don't decriminalize sexual work, how can we do better to meet those needs of the community?
Well, again, this is a relatively new issue for me, but I certainly would not condone any human trafficking at all, if that's what's also a part of it. And I think we just have to respect the dignity of the human being. And I know that because of economic reasons and other reasons that people do things that they really don't want to do. And I'm not sure by condoning that type of activity would really help. What we should do is fight to remove those barriers, the homophobia and the other barriers to entry of just the workforce, and deal with the issue that way rather than justify exploitation because of lack of options. Because again, you know, you have the pimp and the prostitute, whether male or female, and I think the person who is the pimp in that situation should be prosecuted. And so that's my difficulty with that one issue.
Okay. So I think we maybe have time for about 2 more questions.
I'll do it.
So I want to use this opportunity, this conversation, to have us talk a little bit more about jobs because, you know, as I just mentioned, being an LGBT person of color, you often can have multiple strikes against you when trying to enter the workforce, be it your gender expression, be it your race, be it your sexual orientation, your education level. There's many battles to fight, and then oftentimes you don't even know which battle you need to fight or will be presented to you. So keeping all of that in mind, how can you as mayor of Boston help our community get jobs, regardless of how we present ourselves, how we identify, or who we want to be?
Well, I would be in a much stronger position to address that issue as mayor than as a member of the legislative branch of government, because the mayor is responsible, directly and indirectly, for hiring and firing roughly 17,000 people.
Wow, okay.
That's the size of the city's workforce. And that is an enormous responsibility, but also opportunity. As I repeated earlier, I think we should lead by example. Don't judge me by what I say, but what I do. And as mayor, I intend to set the tone. And if I find that people are being discriminated against because of the way they look or because of their transgender status or whatever the case may be, rather than the actual ability to provide a service to the public, then, you know, that department is going to have a major problem with Mayor Yancey.
So I guess beyond discrimination or what is in your direct ability to hire and fire as mayor, when we just look at the availability of jobs for different education levels, as mayor, how can you also work to increase that and make them more accessible to our community? Well,
I think that we have to enforce the Boston residency policy, not only with regards to contracts, but with regards to even hiring. And this goes across the board, no matter what race you are, or gender, or status. I believe that the Boston economy can generate more jobs than what it's doing in the private sector. But I also know that most of the lucrative jobs in the private sector don't go to Boston residents. So I will work with corporations, presidents of corporations based in Boston, to help develop policies where more local people can be employed, open up some jobs for some of the local folks, as well as, of course, doing it in terms of city employment. And I think that'll go a long way to improving the prospects for employment. That coupled with anti-discrimination measures, I think will be a step in the right direction. But I also intend to grow the economy.
Great.
I intend to use whatever resources we have in city government, working in partnership with the state and federal government,
Mm-hmm.
to create an environment in the city of Boston where we're inviting more businesses, where we can have vitality in the various neighborhoods and communities around the city, not just have it concentrated down by Faneuil Hall.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we have ample opportunity to engage, particularly our young people, to come up with their plan of how they want to live in their city. Boston belongs to the young people,
Yeah.
belongs to all of us. And we should remove any barriers for successful development of businesses and for full participation on the part of young people in every aspect of life.
And these can be very brief, so 2 to 3 word answers to end on. But I'm just going to start a phrase and just want you to end the sentence, basically. So the first one is, a more equal and just Boston requires
Courage.
courage, okay? A personal hero of mine is,
Rosa Parks.
great. As a leader, I am looking to improve in the area of,
Education.
great. And to the Black and Latino LGBT community, I pledge.
Support, encouragement, and concern.
Great. That's it. Thank you
Sure.
so much. Is there anything else you want to leave us with? Tell us how people can get involved with your campaign.
My name is Charles Yancey. I'm running for mayor of Boston. I would appreciate your support. I'm asking you to invest in my campaign. Go on my website, charlesyanceyformayor.com. But most of all, I invite all of you to get involved in the campaign this year, hopefully with my campaign, but get involved with some campaign, because the decision you make this year is going to have an impact on the city of Boston for decades to come. Join the Yancey for Mayor campaign. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.